Thanks in no small part to the Fridays for Future movement and the remarkable efforts of Greta Thunberg, it seems that even the last corner of the internet-connected Earth has now realized that we are facing the greatest challenges that humanity has ever had to confront. Not only are we facing catastrophes of infinite proportions in the context of the climate crisis, but the imminent collapse of biodiversity will fundamentally threaten humanity's survival. Decisive action is now required, but the citizens of the world are worried because politics and business are simply not reacting fast enough. Welcome to the first of this year's Larnaca conferences on climate catastrophe. We are excited and proud to have Dr. Martin Frick with us, Deputy of the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Food System Summit 2021. Martin Frick served before as the Senior Director of UN Climate Change. Martin, thank you that you are here and welcome.
Peter, thank you very much, and thank you for the points you made in your moderation. Because I think one of the fundamental points to start with is that it's very, very difficult for people to grasp the enormity of the interconnected environmental crisis. We are basically here as humans, as a species, as a civilization, because of a very narrow corridor that humanity has enjoyed for the last roughly 15,000 years. And we are leaving this corridor. And that is a magnitude of change that is difficult to imagine. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it is not, that with latest progress in space travel, we understand that on Mars and Venus, there might have been water at a point. And what we are seeing is a change that if this continues in a way that is unabated, we might actually turn our planet back into a piece of rock in space, and everything that makes this planet so very different from any other planet we know about would be lost. This is mind-boggling at best, and it is very, very difficult to understand for any decision maker how big an issue that is. The second point I want to make is we always work under an assumption of linear decision making. Basically, politicians would think in terms of let's do 0.2% more deficit spending, and we expect that this would bring down the unemployment by X or Y, although, hard to predict, but we think in linear terms. We think of a big machine where you can turn this screw and then this is happening. And if you made a mistake, you unturn it and you fix it. Climate change and biodiversity doesn't work this way. Climate change and biodiversity starts as a linear loss of species, as a linear increase in global average temperature. But what's happening then are dramatic events. It's the interruption of working, living system that might not come back once you pass the certain threshold. And that we are at these tipping points right now is something that scares me. Because I've been following the climate debate basically for the last 15 years. And everything that I have heard since the mid-2000s is a reality now, basically 10 to 15 years earlier than we thought. It's not 5 to 12, it's 5 past 12. So we have to take urgent and immediate action. Now, this is a hard thing because on the one side, politicians are typically and governments typically elected for 4 years. That's a very short period of time. But the average chief executive in any enterprise has a lifespan of 18 months, 2 years. So, and in these 2 years, you are basically measured against quarterly data. And on the stock exchanges, your performance is measured in real time. Short-term reporting cycles of quarterly results, stock exchanges where shares of enterprises are being dealt with in real time, second to second to second, are not constructed for long-term thinking. Indeed, if you look at companies that are exemplary in terms of sustainable action, it is mostly family businesses. Because these family businesses do have a tradition, they have values behind it, and they think in generation. Publicly traded companies think in the moment, if they think at all. And the paradigm that these publicly traded companies are working on is basically a libertarian credo of the last 30 years, that everything, anytime, wherever you're in the world, available for your convenience immediately. That is something that comes with an extremely high price. If I'm seeing that new delivery services basically claim that they bring my shopping home within less than 15 minutes, what's the human price of it? What's the energy price of it? How are people being treated who are doing that? So the fixation only on the immediate profit, on the immediate being better than the competition, is largely ignoring the societal and the environmental costs of all of these operations. So, with that in mind, people would basically presume or even call for governments to take political action, to create regulatory frameworks that do factor in the environmental damages, the health damages that are significant. It's not only the environment it's suffering, it's human health, and the COVID crisis has shown us to what extent these are interlinked. Take nutrition, for example. Malnourished people are people who are prone to illnesses. And, we afford ourselves on this planet to more than 3 billion people who can't afford healthy diets. So classically, citizens would expect their governments to take actions to basically balance out what the economy cannot balance out. That is actually one of the big lessons, I think, of the last years, that markets are not the invisible hand who gets everything right, but you need regulatory action by governments. But this is often not happening with a view to international competition. The fear basically is that higher standards in my country will make my products less competitive or simply too expensive for international markets. So this is where the United Nations come in, because every country basically shares the same fear. And so there is a push for having an internationally negotiated instrument so as to create the limitations that are necessary to reduce the carbon emissions and biodiversity loss, and to create a level playing field for global economy. And these international negotiations are moving way too slow. And if you actually look at the Paris Agreement that we celebrated in 2015, it is codifying what did not work in 2008 in Copenhagen. Basically, Copenhagen was the moment when the approach of having a globally negotiated agreement that would then translate into national legislation by being ratified by all the countries of the world was abandoned. And it was replaced by a bottom-up pledge and review system. We basically said it's in the hands of countries themselves to declare what they are prepared to do to save the climate, with the perspective of staying well below 2 degrees. And then they can come back after 5 years and present the next updated so-called nationally determined contributions. This is what we expect in Glasgow in a couple of days. And this is where we are lagging behind, because although quite a number of countries have increased their nationally determined contributions, we are still way off of coming to the declared goal of the Paris Agreement to stay well below 2 degrees, which means under 1.5 degrees. So this is not happening because the operating system is not allowing for anything meaningful unless it's agreed in consensus. And national interests are too different to find this consensus. We are having sovereign states who are basically a one-trick pony of oil producers. They only can do that. How do you expect them to agree to something that actually would bring them out of business? And out of business they have to go. There is simply no way to continuing oil exploitation when our carbon budget is basically exhausted.
Yeah.
So we are in a catch-22 between the inability of international action, where often the expectations and the wishes of people are simply not realistic. If I hear, and I do that ever so often, well, the UN has to impose that. Well, the UN cannot impose that. It's not in the operating system of the United Nations. And whenever you push the envelope too strongly as a UN leader of sorts, be sure that the member states will call you back and say, actually, you are the secretariat and we are the boss. You work for us, not the other way around. And then if you go to the frame in which you can take action, which is the national frame, then again, the perception is, why should we die as heroes for the world when others don't? One of the most heard arguments is, well, my contributions, even in a G7 country, are maybe 4 or 5%. That will not fix the climate. And it's true. So you have this situation that everybody is waiting for everybody else to take the first step while we are running out of time in breathtaking speed, really. So that's the situation. And I personally don't expect big miracles in Glasgow. It doesn't look like that. And then we are entering the same ritual of the same disappointments, which are not only sad in terms of not making progress in the negotiations, but they are also sad because so much interest, so much energy, so much positive energy is focused towards the conference of parties, and then it's basically not being used.
This is a frustrating information you are giving us here, and I think many people and children who will watch this keynote will now ask, okay, and what now? When we have a look at humanity, always at the same point when high cultures come to emergent points, they turned to catastrophe, to war. They reduced their population by war and sickness, etc. And it came to breakdowns of societies and cultures. It looks, from what we hear now from you, that we are about to suffer the same thing now on a global scale. So what can we do? What can the single person do? What can we do as a collective of people deeply concerned about what is going on here, aside from buying less stuff and demonstrate on the streets? What is there to be done?
I mean, the first thing is that, of course, this is alarming news.
Yes.
And often you hear from communication experts that you cannot communicate anything in an alarmist way. You always need to give people a positive perspective. And I do agree, but at the same time, we must not forget how serious the situation is. So the first step is really to have this sort of mature emotional state in which you accept that there is a situation. Then I think it's actually entirely doable to turn it around.
How?
That it's not doable on the basis of using the same instruments. As Albert Einstein said, if you continue to do the same thing and you expect different results, that's madness. So the children and the Fridays for Future instinctively got it right. Because what has been missing over the last 20 years is grassroots action. All the big NGOs, they were also in the negotiations, but they got sucked in almost as shadow negotiators in all the arcane mechanics, trying to fix it from inside, while the real work to be done is to be out there in the inner cities, to talk to people, to make noise, to convince. And I cannot say how grateful I am to the Fridays for what they have been doing, because that's the hard work, being out there, talking to your parents, talking to your grandparents, and getting the situation out there. The second bit is, don't be wrapped in expert language. I was myself a victim of that, coming to the climate process in the 2000s. And basically, there was an attitude of, you keep your mouth shut until you understand the process. Well, good luck to you, because it can take a decade and you still don't understand the process. My revelation is, maybe this process is not built to be understood. And like in the fairy tale of the emperor's new clothes, it took children to say the emperor is naked. Because I don't understand what you're saying, but I'm seeing that the situation is getting worse. So I think one big issue is, we really need to have a positive vision about how a different life looks like. And often there is an instinct of people not to change, which is very human, because of a perception of losing quality of life. But are inner cities in which you can't breathe because of all the diesel exhaust, are these livable cities? Is it normal to take 2 hours of your day every day to commute to an inner city and coming back? So these questions suddenly popped up in an unexpected way with the COVID pandemic. And I remember the first days of the lockdown where, and it's hard to say because, you know, with all the grievances and so many people who died and lost loved ones, for me personally, I experienced it as finally being allowed to breathe.
Yeah.
Suddenly life stopped. The crazy rat race stopped. And we have now the repercussions. This conference, we are sitting in 2 different venues. We are connecting digitally, and this works, and we are having a conversation. So if you look at 85% of the jobs out there, somebody sitting at a computer doing whatever, you don't need to be in an inner city to do that. So one thing is happening right now, which is rethinking our hypermobility. The second bit is also to think about our concept of happiness. You know, is happiness to fly to some foreign destination where you have absolutely no clue about the local culture? Everything you know is basically from the in-flight magazine that is trying to sell you a visit to the next Hard Rock Cafe. How very original. Does that make you happy? Or is it that you finally explore your neighborhood, that if people are not constantly on the move, you will actually connect with neighbors? So the lifestyle in itself, but then also our basic narratives. You know, I'm mid-50s now, so I remember how all the environmental movement came in the 70s and 80s, and we always worked under the assumption of limitation. So you shouldn't drive a car, you shouldn't go and buy new clothes, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you need to dial down the temperature of your heating and all of that. I think if we are serious about changing our energy model to renewable energy entirely, we are actually looking at an abundance of energy. We are looking at a situation where in summer you could have the air conditioning running and the window open, and it would not matter because you're producing your own electricity. Because
you're talking about emancipation here at the same time, yeah, to emancipate the people in their own homes.
Absolutely, and this is a hidden point, I think, in the energy turnaround that we don't speak about, but that is seriously threatening for big commodities. Because in the old model, you got somewhere a power station, coal, nuclear, water, what have you, which is ridiculously expensive to build. And then you connect the energy via a grid, and you as the consumer pay for the electricity. That's the old system, and it's a very, very lucrative system. If you are really energy independent, you don't need the big commodities anymore. Or if you need them, you maybe need them as energy security provider, but not for the base load, which means you have a backup to get energy in case anything is wrong with your own system, or you got the proverbial 1 week of clouded sky and no wind or what have you. But that is much more of a boutique thing. Now, is that something to be afraid of? I don't think so. And my best example for that is when I got my first mobile phone in 1999. I think you could buy it for about 1,000 Deutschmarks. Those were the days. Or you could just get it with a contract for 1 Deutschmark. And I thought at the time, these people must be crazy. They give it away for 1 Deutschmark or for €1. Of course, they made their benefit in a different business model. So I think, what we are seeing in many aspects is the last roar of the dinosaurs who don't want to die. But at the same time, there is so much to be done in a much more constructive way. And then my last point would be, on an individual basis, I firmly believe that the single most important choice everyone can do every single day with respect to climate and biodiversity is simply food. Food is such a monster. Food is the biggest killer of biodiversity out there. It's the single biggest sector contributing to climate change. It is the reason why we are losing arable soils at breathtaking speed. Wrong agriculture, but at the same time also losing agricultural ground for unabated expansion, new supermarkets, new parking lots, all of them are burying the very existence, the very basis of our existence. So food choices absolutely do matter. And, it's simple. Just buy less, but better food. Be prepared to spend a bit more money. And it's money well invested, because for your own health, for your own happiness, and for the environment, we can spend a little bit more. And I give you one shocking number before I stop. That is, Germany, where we both live, is one of the richest countries on the planet. But in terms of percentage, it is almost on top of the list of the countries spending least money for food. The average German family spends less than 3% of the family income for food. Now, if you go somewhere to some cheap supermarket, it's astonishing that you see people driving 60, 80,000 euro cars to go in and buy meat that is 55 cents for the pound. That doesn't work, and that's intrinsically wrong. And driving that car doesn't make you happy, but sharing a good meal with good food does make you happy. Mm-hmm. So it's the basic assumptions. But, my last sentence, I am really, really enthusiastic about young people under 18 currently, because they totally get it. And I think there's a generation coming on and becoming voters and going to the ballot box already now, or at least in 2 to 4 years, which is really focused on the right things in life. So that gives me a lot of hope and energy.
Thank you. What you are saying here is highly encouraging, because from my perspective, you are talking about emancipation, you are talking about free spirits, you're talking about getting rid of addiction. Food, in many ways, many people are addicted to sugar and salt and flour, etc., which is not good for their health. So you are addressing the individual here to take action and to emancipate in your own home, in your own space, in your own body, get free of addiction, and thus you are at the same time helping humanity by getting rid of the bigger problems, or at least contribute to a better future. When I worked in charity and helped people dependent on German welfare, I always saw how the big corporations involved in energy, coal, and etc., are treating people depending on power, depending on gas to heat their homes. And what you are talking here is about helping people to not live in fear any longer, to live in cold in the winter, to have no light, to support their children while they are learning. And at the same time, you talk about health, psychological health, and the health of the body. I think that is a really good approach and a helpful approach. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to add?
Well, yes. I mean, you're mentioning welfare and the welfare state.
Yeah.
It's also time to rethink some of the basic paradigms. One certainly is the paradigm of the only way to make a living is to have a regular job. Is that really necessary?
Thank you. I hoped so much for something like this. Yes, exactly.
And the second thing is, if you want to support people, maybe there are smarter ways to do that. Imagine a single mother, for example, struggling to make ends meet. If part of a social welfare system would be a specific amount of energy a day that you can get for free, let's say 2 kilowatt hours or 4 kilowatt hours, then you could combine that with a system by which you enable this young mother to get latest household appliances, for example, an energy efficient fridge that costs, let's say, 800 euros that she could never afford, but she could get it for free, could use less energy than she used before. She could keep 50% of the savings, basically not to pay a higher energy bill, and 50% could pay back the fridge over 3 years. That would be a win-win-win for everyone, you know. Or washing machines that come with a signal, so they would switch on in the middle of the night when people don't need energy, and in the morning when you wake up, your laundry is being done. Doesn't make a difference in your quality of life, but it helps equalizing the energy demand. So I think the biggest renewable energy we actually have is human creativity. And we are very dumb when it comes to energy production and energy usage. And we could do that so much smarter if we are basically going 2 steps back and don't think about the pattern we are known to work with, but we are thinking in expected outcomes. So what do I want? I need food storage. Well, maybe that is something 4 or 5 families can share. I don't know. Would be one possibility. I need a place to live. I want to have warm. I want to have a hot meal. Or, you know, cars. What is a car? A car is a means to transport. So maybe the question is not what is my next car, but what is the most convenient way for me to go to the different places I need to go. And then you are in a differentiated discussion. Because what I need daily might be a 3-kilometer commute that I can do by bus or with a bicycle. And my need or my perceived need to spend holidays with the kids once a year and drive somewhere could be done with a rental car or with a railway or with a shared ride. So you open the horizon for solutions once you think about not what product I want to buy, but what improvement of my life quality I'm aiming at. And that's a different question.
Thank you so much. This is inspiring. Thank you, Martin. I think you gave us a lot to think about and to look forward to. The recording will be presented to every participant and all panelists prior to the conferences so that everybody can see them and then ask later his or her questions to the panel. And you will be there at the conference on November 6th?
I will be there.
Fantastic. We look forward to it. We already have some children who are interested in asking you questions. So this was something really beautiful.
Wonderful.
Thank you for your
Always
time.
the best and the toughest question coming from children.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.